other page up on the phone so I can see the comments on the other page. Bear with me. So how are we all today? Nice warm day today. If you could escape the wind, that is. So let's bring that one up. Right, now I can see the image screen on both. So today we're doing Braemorriston House, which has turned out to be more eventful than I thought it would be. So I'm going to start with the boring stuff and where you can find information about the house, and then I'll move on to more of the story itself. So to begin with, it's basically the referencing stuff, because my settings wouldn't actually let me open the various articles. Under the libindex system, which you can access through the Moray District Council website, go on to libraries, and then from libraries you can select libindex. You can search people, street names, house names, all sorts of bits and pieces there. And some of the articles that came up on the libindex search, which it wouldn't let me open the articles. There's the sale of the house in 1862. The 27th of March 1862. On the 8th of April 1862, there was a description and sale of the house owned by the deceased Admiral Duff of Drummuir. Then on the 15th of April, so this is when the guy's just died and he's all over the local papers. 15th of April, there is the sale of the furniture of the deceased Mrs. Duff. And 1873, the house sold for £3,000. Doesn't sound a lot, but in 1873, it's a lot, trust me. On the 6th of July, 1889, there was an article published in a trade paper requesting contractors for the erection of a cottage for Major T.G. Duff of Drummuir. So again, another military man being tied in with the house. On the 12th of February 1892, the house, the stables, the coach house and the garden were being let out. On the 27th of October 1900, there was a letter published in the Northern Scot about the roses in John Wink's garden. So I'm guessing John Winks was one of the ones who bought the house or rented sections of the house. And then on the 11th of February 1916, there is an article in the Elgin Courant telling you that the house is opening as an auxiliary hospital. Then there's another article in 17th September 1919 saying it was purchased by the town council. The estate of Drummuir was purchased by the town council. So the estate of Drummuir basically is forests rather than Elgin, but those are the lands that the family controlled. 17th of November 1930, there was fire damage to the house. Again, the system wouldn't let me open any of these articles. It just told me that they have these articles on file at the library when everything's allowed to be open again. 10th of April 1982, there are the buildings of some houses within the grounds. 10th of July 1982, there is a rejection of an application to build more houses in the grounds. That application was raised by a resident who wanted to build another house in the grounds. 25th of April 2001, there was an article in the Northern Scot telling people about the clearing of the jungle garden attached to the house. So the whole place had been left to rack and ruin. Also on file are the title deeds of the house from 1817 to 1919. 1951, there is a copy of a disposition. Oh look, Facebook just told me I'm on live. Woohoo! Well done, Facebook. You're only 5 minutes and 15 seconds late. 1916. The photographs that I uploaded this afternoon are from patients and staff of the Braemorriston Auxiliary Hospital. It's in the Christmas number from 1916. There are plans on file of the house itself from 1889, from the flats that the alterations that they made to the centre flat in 1959, so it was already flats in 1959. 1978, the plan for a chalet is on file. 1981, alterations to the upper flat. 1837, there are plans on file for the additions to the house for Captain Duff of Drumure. But there's 2 plans missing. Hey, Naomi! 1981, there are plans for alterations to the kitchen and the bathroom in the lower flat. See what I mean by getting the boring stuff out of the way first. And then, where are we? 1948, there was a planning application made to convert the stables into dwelling places. And there was also a planning application made in 1954 for 2 houses to be built in the grounds. 1959, planning application for the alterations to the house, which would be for the centre flat. 1960, there's plans on files for a bungalow and a garage. I promise I'm nearly done with the boring stuff. In amongst the minutes of one of the Moray District Council meetings that's on file and public record, in 1994, a D. Carney received a grant of £900 for the upkeep and improvement of the east wing of the building, because it is of architectural and historical interest. 1852, Admiral Duff of Drumure was listed as one of the parliamentary voters for Braemorriston House. He's also listed in the directory of Bishopmill. Now, on Google Books and via LibIndex, you can access town directories. Instead of a phone book, they published these little directory books that told you who lived on what street. The numbers there's no numbers there, but it tells you who's on what street. So, and it has listed Admiral Duff of Drumure in the Bishopmill directory in 1852. Also in 1852, you have a Miss Jones listed at Braemorriston. That's 1852. Them 2 got married later on, but I'll tell you that a wee bit more. Both Miss Jones and Admiral Duff had put contributions into the publication of a diary to make it publicly available. This diary was written by Reverend W.I. Coppard, who was down in Plympton in Devonshire. And the diaries that were made publicly available were his documentation of the when the cholera came through Plympton. It's his observation on how the patients were, how the public reacted, any treatments they received, and how those panned out. Now, both Miss Jones and Admiral Duff contributed money towards the publication of this because they believed it was something that should be on public record, so everybody had at least basic access. Hey, Deborah, had at least basic access to see what it's all about and what they could do. Yeah, exactly, Scott. Well, the original plan seems to only be 3 flats. Just 3 flats. Original. But now, I would presume it's more. On the 15th of May 1853, Vice Admiral Duff is recorded as having donated £5 for normal schools in Elgin via a benevolent fund run by the St Giles Church. £5 donation in 1853, that's a week's wage for a normal person. 21st of December 1861, at the age of 74, Mrs. Frances Duff, widow of Admiral Archibald Duff of Braemorriston, Royal Navy, passed away in the house. This was found in the Annual Register of History and Politics for 1862. It's a bit weird because a lot of this information is from magazines, and these magazines were produced twice yearly. You've got the Annual Register of History and Politics, you've got the Gentleman's Magazine, and they seem to be like every 6 months these books were put out. Now, Admiral Duff himself, his obit was published in the January to June 1858 edition of the Gentleman's Magazine. The copy I was reading this morning on Google Books is actually held at the Indiana University. And the obit reads as this: 83-year-old Admiral Duff, second son of Major Duff and grandson of Mr. John Duff of Colbin, entered the Navy in 1788, attained flag rank in 1840, and was placed as Admiral on the reserve list in 1855. Having left no children, he is succeeded in the family estate of Drumure by his cousin Major Lachlan Duff Gordon of Park, MP for Banffshire, who will assume the name of Duff in the terms of the deed of entails. That's how your fancy legal stuff to say his cousin's taken over the lands that they ran. Okay, that's just told me there's an unknown error and they can't play the video on the phone. Let me see if it does it, if it's actually working. Because that's a bit weird. And then I found a description of the building from an edition of Murrayshire Described in 1868. This looks like a frozen... Is it working? Am I still here? Has it frozen? I think I'm still here. Facebook has not received video signal. Oh, for goodness sake. Anyway, I'll carry on because if it's not working, the screen's going to go completely blank anyway and I'll be able to see. But at the moment, I don't actually know if it's working or not. So the description of the house in 1868 Murrayshire Described. It's listed as a guide to visitors. The property of Lachlan Duff. So, of course, this is after the Admiral's died. Brilliant. Thank you, Scott. Thanks, Audrey. It's just because the playback on the phone actually died and said there's an error, and then I got a message up on this screen, so I didn't know what was going on. So, property of Lachlan Duff Gordon Duff. Lachlan Duff Gordon Duff Esquire of Drumure, who inherited it from his cousin, Admiral Duff of Braemorriston. The grounds, including several acres of arable land and enclosed by a high stone wall on 3 sides, and the 4th side descends by a precipitous bank to the River Lossy. The house, which stands on the edge of the bank, commands an excellent prospect, except where the view is broken by the surrounding fir trees. It is 2 stories high, of an irregular form, being built by the late Admiral Duff at different periods, and consisted of 3 separate sections. Entrance is on the north front, embellished by portico of 2 Ionic pillars. Ionic basically just means, it's another way of saying Greco-Roman. 2 Ionic pillars supporting an entablature, a big flat bit of stone that looks like it should have something written on it, and an impediment, a space on either side of the entrance treated in a similar manner, the one finished with a parapet and the other with balusters. A large wing runs parallel with this section, having an arched recess and an excellent vinery on the south front. The southern section has circular gables, which contain the drawing room in one and the dining room in the other, with a small ante-room between them. And then I ran out of room in my notebook and had to go paper. So, Admiral Archibald Duff. See, it's all these AD people. Admiral Archibald Duff, Royal Navy. Born in 1773. He is the 7th of Drummure. He joined the Navy on the 29th of June 1788. He became a captain on the 22nd of January 1806. By the 17th of August, he was the Rear Admiral in 1840. By the 3rd of March 1849, he was a Vice Admiral of Red. I don't know what the of red means. By the 4th of July 1855, he was an Admiral on half pay, so he was on the reserves list. And 3 years later, he died at the age of 83. So at the age of 80, he was made an Admiral and given half of his pay for being on the reserve list. But he was 80, so there was no way he was going to be going anywhere fighting. He's the son of Alexander Duff of Davidston. There's a bit of debate about that. Some books say Davidston, and some books say Davidson. So with or without the T, it's your own choice which one you want to take. His brother was John Duff, the 6th of Drummure. So he's basically, Archibald is basically the youngest of his family. Miss Jones was a Frances Jones, who was a daughter of a minister from a place called Guestling in Sussex. Archibald himself is buried in, forgive my pronunciation, Botrifne Kirkyard in Keith, Botriphnie Kirkyard in Keith. The inscription on his grave is as follows. Upon the site of the Drummure burial place, near this spot lie interred the remains of Major Alexander. Hey Mark. Hey Naomi. Near this spot lie interred the remains of Major Alexander Duff, the younger of Colbin, who died at Davidston in 1777. Also his son, Admiral Archibald Duff of Drummure, who departed this life at Braemorriston near Elgin, because of course there was a big gap between here and Elgin, on the 9th day of February 1858, aged 84. Also in the same gravestone, Frances Jones widow of Admiral Archibald Duff of Braemorriston. She also died at Braemorriston on the 21st of December 1861, aged 74. So he died February 1858 and she followed him 3 years later in the December. Now, I know you like a bit of background on the people. Thank you, Moira. Admiral of Red is a high-ranking senior officer. Ooh. I've actually got his Navy records here that I printed off this morning. So I'll start with the short one first. Archibald Duff, Rear Admiral of the Red at this point in 1840. F to P, 18, H to P, 41. I don't know what that's about. Archibald Duff entered the Navy 29th of June 1788 as a boy. You're no kidding, he would have just turned 15 when he joined the Navy. Hey, Grant. So yeah, he joined the Navy as a boy on board the Champion 24 under Captain Sampson Edwards on the Leith station. In January 1791, he became midshipman of the Martin sloop, captained by George Duff, which is actually a relative of his. And with that officer, he continued employed in the Resource 23, Duke 98, Ambuscade 38, and Glenmore 50 until May 1798. In the Duke, he served under the broad pendant of Commodore Murray during the expedition against Martinique in June 1793. Having been awarded, when in the Ambuscade, a commission dated 8th of December 1798, Mr. Duff, on leaving the Glenmore, was appointed to a lieutenancy in the Foudroyant 80. Captain Sir Thomas Bayard, on rejoining which ship, you can tell it's Victorian by the way it's written, after a brief attachment to the Barfleur 98, we find him while at the blockade of Malta, present with Lord Nelson at the capture on the 18th of February 1800 of Le Généraux 1704 and Ville de Marseille storeship. So he was actually serving with Nelson. He soon after removed to the Queen Charlotte 100, bearing the flag of Lord Keith, and on the 17th of March following, narrowly escaped involvement in the destruction of that ship, being on board when she took fire in Leghorn Roads. In the course of the same year, he was promoted from the Minotaur 74, Captain Thomas Lewis, to the acting command of the Bon Citoyen. It's like city, but instead of Y, it's Oyen at the end. Bon Citoyen, which was a sloop. His confirmation was not taking place. He joined the William Tell in Spanish, 80, and became first lieutenant to Lord Keith in his old ship, the Foudroyant. After figuring in the Egyptian campaign, you can see why this guy had a lot of money, can't you, with all the different campaigns he was serving in. After figuring in the Egyptian campaign for his services, during which he received the Turkish Gold Medal, Mr. Duff, who had been invested with the temporary command of the Mondovi brig, returned to England with Captain Richard Curry and Major Henry Montresor. I'm recognising a lot of these names historically. The officers charged with the naval and military dispatches announcing the surrender of Grand Cairo. Prior to his official promotion to the rank of commander on the 29th of April 1802, he appears to have repulsed an attack made on the Mondovi by 17 Spanish gunboats in the Gut of Gibraltar, and to have been in command of the Lutine prison ship in Minorca. Captain Duff's first appointment on the renewal of hostilities was the 25th of October 1803 to the Megera fireship, in which, with a few small vessels, occasionally under his orders, he was employed watching the enemy's ports in the Channel. Assuming post rank on the 22nd of January 1806, he next joined 28th of May 1807. This is not an easy read. You have to translate it as you're reading. The Muros 20, and in that ship, after convoying a fleet of merchantmen to Halifax, was unfortunately wrecked on a reef at the entrance of the Bay of Honda in Cuba. On the 24th of March 1808, his last employment was in the command from 23rd of April 1814 to August 1815 of the President on the Irish station. He attained flag rank on the 17th of August 1840. Rear Admiral Duff, when he was a lieutenant of the Foudroyant, received a gold medal from the Royal Humane Society for his intrepid and manly exertions. That's how you know it's an old document, because everything's really manly. His intrepid and manly exertions in jumping overboard in a dark night of September 1799 and saving the life of a man who had fallen into the sea. He got married on the 1st of December 1815 to Frances Jones, who was the third daughter of the late Reverend Meredith Jones of Guestling in the county of Sussex. Some documents say their official residence is Drumure Castle, but I can only ever find them staying at Braemorriston. So that was the short version of his naval record. Now here's the long one, the 3 pages long one. So, again, forgive me, it's Victorian language and I'm having to kind of translate as I go. Archibald Duff, Esquire, post captain of 1806. So this was written while he was still a captain. Embarked as a midshipman in June 1788. Served the first 2 years of his time on board the Champion 24, commanded by Captain, now Admiral, Sampson Edwards, on the Leith station. You can tell this one is actually written by somebody who was serving. This isn't written by a highly educated officer. This is written by a common sense person because it's a lot easier to read, even though it's actually older than the other one is. From the Leith station. The remainder under the late Captain George Duff in the Martin sloop, Resource frigate, Glory 98, and Duke of the same force, the latter second-rate bearing the broad pendant of the Honourable Commodore Murray. During the expedition against Martinique in June 1793. His promotion to the rank of lieutenant took place in the course of the year 1794, and we afterwards find him serving with Captain Duff in the Ambuscade and Glenmore frigates on the North Sea and Irish stations. Mr. Duff's next employment was to the Foudroyant of 80 guns, commanded by Sir Thomas Bayard, with whom he continued on Channel service until that officer's demise on October the 30th, 1798. He subsequently joined the Barfleur 98 and proceeded in her to the Mediterranean, where he again removed into the Foudroyant, which ship shortly afterwards received the flag of Lord Nelson, by whom he had the honour of being allowed to renew one of his lieutenants. I don't know what they mean by renewing one of his lieutenants, but... In September 1799, the subject of this sketch performed a very intrepid and humane action, for which he was deservedly praised, both by his admiral and captain, the latter of whom granted him a certificate to the following effect. These are to certify that Captain Archibald Duff, when a lieutenant on board HMS Foudroyant, under my command in 1799, and when she was lying at anchor in the Bay of Palermo, did, in a most gallant manner, jump overboard and save a seaman belonging to said ship. This happened in the middle watch, and the night was very dark. Obviously. The unfortunate man would most certainly have been drowned had it not been for the exertions of this enterprising young officer. Signed, T.M. Handy. On the 10th of February 1800, Lieutenant Duff assisted at the capture of Le Généraux, which was French gunship 74, and a large armed transport proceeding to the relief of Malta. Soon after this event, he joined the ill-fated Queen Charlotte, whose destruction by fire off Leghorn has been fully described in our memoir of Captain the Honourable George H.L. Dundas. On that awful occasion, Lieutenant Duff was only roused from his sleep by the guns going off as they became heated, and he escaped from the surrounding flames by jumping overboard and swimming to the launch. He spends a lot of time in the water, this guy. Swimming to the launch, which was providentially towing astern, which was luckily being pulled behind the ship. In plain English, and had already been taken possession of by many more men than she could conveniently carry. Mr. Duff fortunately reached her just as they were in the act of casting off the tow rope, and he had the happiness of being afterwards able to save the lives of several other persons, as appears by the testimony of a respectable officer who thus expresses himself on the subject. Quote, Captain Duff, when lieutenant of His Majesty's late ship Queen Charlotte, at the time she was burnt, was the means of saving the lives of several men. Through his humane and feeling exertions, by overruling the objections of those in the boat with him against receiving any more, of which number I was one of the fortunate individuals saved on that melancholy occasion. So the little rescue boat is already holding more folk than it really should. They're all telling him, don't be pulling any more people out of the water. He pulls more people out of the water, including his commanding officer and his commanding officer's boss. And of course, he's recognised with a great big green tick on his service record. So he's getting brownie points galore. And I don't make any wonder this guy had a big house. He did a lot of good. And that was signed by William Ferguson, Lieutenant of the Royal Marines. After remaining for some time on board the Minotaur 74, Mr. Duff was appointed to command the Bon Citoyen sloop of war. But the Admiralty refusing to confirm his acting order, he was obliged to join the Goyim Tel, a French 80 taken by Lord Nelson's squadron, and to continue in her until Lord Keith shifted his flag from the Minotaur to the Foudroyant, when he became first lieutenant of the latter ship, in which capacity and as acting commander for the Mondovi brig, he continued during the most part of the campaign in Egypt. On the surrender of Grand Cairo, the Mondovi was selected to carry home Captain Richard Curry and Major Henry Montresor, the officers charged with the naval and military dispatches announcing that conquest, and on her return to the Mediterranean, Lieutenant Duff resumed his former resumed his former station in the Foudroyant, but was shortly afterwards appointed by Lord Keith to the command of the Lutine prison ship of Amiens. I hope you're sitting comfy and have got snacks. This might take a while, because I've not even got on to the other bit of the story yet. His commission as a commander was confirmed about the same period. We should here observe that the Mondovi was attacked by 17 Spanish gunships in the Gut of Gibraltar and succeeded in beating them off. Must have been a good crew and bloody good ship. Notwithstanding their immense superiority of force, she also captured several of the French vessels with troops whilst commanded by Captain Duff. It should be a Captain Duff. It's actually Captain Puff that they've written, and employed on the coast of Egypt. Shortly after the renewal of the war in 1803, Captain Duff was appointed to the Maghera fireship, and a few small vessels were occasionally placed under his command for the purpose of watching the enemy's ports in the Channel. This post-commission bears the date January the 22nd, 1806. In 1807, we find Captain Duff commanding the Muros of 20 guns and convoying a fleet of merchantmen to Halifax, from whence he proceeded to the Jamaica station and there made several captures. Whilst cruising off the Havana in March 1808, Captain Duff received information that the Spaniards were fortifying Bahia Honda, basically Honda Bay, and as that was the only port on the north coast of Cuba into which a British ship could run for shelter during bad weather, he considered it a matter of importance to destroy the enemy's works. But unfortunately, his pilot ran the Muros onto a reef at the entrance of the harbour. I've been in those waters that they're talking about now. There are reefs everywhere. It's a really dodgy place to be in charge of a boat. His pilot ran the Muros onto a reef at the entrance of the harbour, and every effort to get her off proved useless. Fortunately, a small privateer... yeah. A privateer. What's a privateer? It's a pirate who's actually in the employ of one or other of the Navy or Marines. Fortunately, a small privateer was then in company, and with their aid, Captain Duff was enabled to carry the whole of his officers and crew to 3 prize vessels which he had left at the dry Tortugas, from whence they all returned in safety to Jamaica. And no, it wasn't Captain Jack, even though we're on Tortuga Island. Captain Duff's last appointment was in 1813 to the President frigate, then on the Cork station, but subsequently sent to protect the north coasts of Ireland and Scotland against the American cruisers, on which service he continued to be employed until the termination of hostilities in 1815. In 1819, Captain Duff published a claim to the invention of the tube sight for giving greater effect to the fire of artillery, more particularly at sea, as submitted to the Right Honourable the Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty on the 4th of October. So basically, he's put a report into the head honchos of the Admiralty and said, here, look, I think I've invented some kind of fancy sight that we can attach onto our guns, and I think I'm the first one to have the idea. On the 4th On the 4th of October 1813 is when he claims to have invented it. With further illustrations and comparative remarks on the tube site, as lately recommended by Major General Sir William Congreve in his book of the 4th of February 1818, and tried on board His Majesty's ship Liffey, in this pamphlet Captain Duff writes, I have hitherto had no reason to believe but that I was the first to recommend the improved site and to enforce the principle on which its efficiency depends. But my method of applying it was not so fortunate as to meet with the approbation of their lordships, to whom it was presented about 5 years ago. This I learned by observing the same site, though with additional apparatus, and applied in a different manner, on a plan of Major General Sir William Congreve's, was ordered for trial by the Board of Admiralty in December last, on board HMS Liffey. So he's saying, look, here, I invented this thing, and I tell you about it, and you did nothing about it. Now I'm seeing somebody else has done the same thing with a couple of improvements, and you're letting them test theirs? What's wrong with mine? Is basically what he's saying. Uninformed, however, of the date on which Sir William Congreve first put his ideas on the subject on record, or gave them publicity further than what his work declares, I shall be ready to yield to him my claim to the original invention whenever he may make it appear that I ought to do so. In other words, prove it and I'll stand down. But as to the practical utility of this plan, I must here repeat that his premises appear to me, morally as well as physically, so unattainable, and his whole process so directly at variance with a seaman's knowledge and experience, that I do not hesitate to predict, whatever may have been the result of the practice in the smooth water of the River Medway, where probably the different distances were measured or otherwise ascertained, it will never stand the test of experiment in action, in a rough sea, or in ocean water, where alone its utility must be looked for. For the particulars of Captain Duff's invention, we must refer our readers to his pamphlet, which was published at number 87 Wimpole Street, Cavendish Square, London. I couldn't find a copy of it, but apparently if you dig deep enough there are still some floating around. Captain Duff was presented with 2 gold medals during the late wars. One he received from the Turkish government for his services in Egypt, and the other from the Royal Humane Society for his intrepid and manly exertions, risking his own to preserve the life of a fellow creature. It was a fellow officer, but never mind. That's signed by J. Petty Muspratt, Esquire. And then we have, at the end of his military career, Archibald Duff, Esquire, Supplement Part 1. Archibald was tried by a court-martial on March 22nd, 1805, for using unofficer-like language and giving superior ratings to persons not qualified. He appears to have only been admonished and desired to be more circumspect in his conduct for the future. So he was had up for swearing and talking one person down and the other person up. And then we move on to the last little bit, but I'm going to read Scott's message first. Scott says he remembers adventuring through the walkies once near Bishopmill Primary, went down the steep bank towards the river, then walked towards the gardens of the house, but in the middle of the wooded bit, found a random stone. Yes, there is a well. Yes, it was part of the grounds, was the well. Found a random stone well there. Don't know if it was part of the gardens. Yeah, it's on one of the archaeology reports I found this morning that it was rediscovered when they cleared the jungle that surrounded the building. So, yeah. Now, the last bit I didn't print off. So, Archibald dies. 3 years and 11 months later, his wife dies. They don't have kids. The house goes to his cousin from Forres, from Banffshire, because he's the MP for Banffshire. The house goes to him. And then after a while, they decide they don't need it because their life moves on with the politics stuff and other bits and pieces. And his missus basically decided it should be used for better things. So they tried a few different things. And then by the time the 1900s rolls around, it's still the same family, it's still the Duffs, but it's another generation that's there. And they decided that they would gift it, seeing as everybody who'd lived in that house had spent their entire life serving in the military. They decided to use it to give something back. And the house became the Braemorriston Auxiliary Hospital. I'm going to read you the stuff from that page, because I didn't see the point in printing off even more. Braemorriston Auxiliary Hospital. Braemorriston House in Elgin, built by Captain and later Admiral Archibald Duff of Drumure in 1819 and significantly extended in 1837. In late 1915, it was offered for use as a hospital by Lady Frances and Mr. A. Gordon Duff, and was ready to serve by February 1916. The Elgin Courant on February 11th reported, "For the purpose of a convalescent home, the situation of the house is ideal. It stands on the steep bank of the Lossy, overlooking the public park, where the cattle show is held." Aye, Borobriggs football ground. Used to be where they held the cattle shows. So, public park where the cattle show is held. It is the furthest of the Bishopmill houses, so it basically stands alone, and stands absolutely apart in about 4.5 acres of ground which borders on the river. We know from that report that there were 6 beds in the Hopeman ward. The Hopeman ward was named in recognition of the assistance given by the detachment of that village. An Elgin ward was also with 6 beds, and a Granton ward with 7 beds. In addition, there were some smaller rooms, the total provision being in the region of 25 patients. Interestingly, the Courant continued, "While we cannot exactly say that we hope soon to see the hospital well filled, it is at least exceedingly satisfactory for us to know that we have in Braemorriston comfortable accommodations and a most beautiful situation in which to nurse back to health and strength those of our soldiers who have had the misfortune to be removed from the active work of the army. The hospital was furnished and fitted throughout." The hospital was furnished and fitted out through significant public support, the most important contribution being received from Mr. George Anderson of Granton and Spey. His gift consisted of 19 beds and 3 spring mattresses. Who were the first staff? The Northern Scot identifies the medical officer as Dr. Watson, the matron as Mrs. Cruikshank, the quartermaster as Miss Murray, and that would start with 2 resident and 2 non-resident nurses. As with so many wartime hospitals, Braemorriston and its patients enjoyed significant community support. The photographs I posted this afternoon appeared in the pages of the Northern Scot Christmas numbers from 1916, while both the Northern Scot and the Elgin Courant regularly reported on the hospital's activities. So there you go. I couldn't give info on the building itself because a lot of the articles are on LibIndex. And when they're not accessible online, that means they are probably on microfiche. So we can't read them until the library is open. But I did manage to get a good chunk of stuff on Admiral Archibald and basically his entire naval career. So it's very interesting reading. There is more to be found out there, but if you're searching, if you want to see the history and not just Zoopla and sell my house or buy my house, when you look on your Google page, you see the three, you got like all images, shopping, and then there's 3 wee dots. Click on the 3 wee dots, you'll get books. And where you can actually read the book is because they've digitally photographed a copy of that book and it's been uploaded to some digital library or not, some digital library or other, and Google has trawled that library. So you can actually read the book and you'll be able to see what I mean by the language that's used, the spellings that are used. Reading 18th and 19th century English is not as easy as reading a book now. So it was a very, very important house. Now you can't see it. I'd love to go and have a wander around. Yeah. Yeah, Michelle, the Duffs go back really, really far. Duffus, to start with, during the time of the Vikings, Duffus was called Dufferas, which is the settlement of the Duffs. And that's in the 1000s when the Vikings came. Aye, the fancy coving and stuff. One of my friends was in there helping, 7, 8 years ago. They were redoing the insulation above the ceilings because they had to change it because it was all fiberglass stuff that was still in there. And they were getting folk that they can't to do it rather than having to pay the huge prices of the official folk to remove it. So I've never set foot in the place. I would love to have a nosy round, but with it all being flats now, it's probably just a case of you can probably just see staircases now. So, the roses on the ceiling round the lights, yeah. It's a ceiling rose though, they are. But 17 and 1800s, it's going to have fancy plasterwork in every room, particularly the round rooms at either end of the building. They will be really, really ostentatious because they were the drawing room and the dining room, and the drawing room and the dining room. The whole reason you have both is so you can really show your house off. So they will be really highly ornamented, those 2 rooms. Because when you invite people to your house, it was only proper that you had dinner in the dining room, and then after dinner the men would have their cigars and such like. Either the men would use the withdrawing room for their cigars and such, or the men would stay in the dining room and the ladies would leave to the withdrawing room. Because the men were smoking and telling rude stories and boozing. And the women were allegedly just talking about nice, delicate, feminine things. It was probably pretty similar at either end of the building, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah, I've got a I've got a survey of the province of Moray. It's a reprint from 1984, but it's the 1858 version, I think. I can't even remember what I said the other night. I'm sure I said it was 1858 the other night. The survey of the province of Moray books are fantastic because you get who owns the estate, who lives there, how much rent they paid, what they did for a living, what each person in the house did for a living if they worked outside of the estate, and so on and so forth. It's really, really cool. Yeah, see, I've not heard any proper ghost stories from the place, but I have heard through the grapevine that there's not leather-soled shoes, but hard-soled shoes marching across the, like in the front entryway. They hear like solid-soled shoes, but they're marching like soldiers would march. There's a couple of times I've had a wee corner of the eye thing where I've seen a bloke wandering through the woodies, and he's got a flat peak cap on like the guys in the photo. So there may still be a couple of them lingering around. Yeah, because the lobbies of these buildings would have been really, really busy. So I need to look up that Admiral of Red, because there has to be a reason why they say of red. Or is it a case of red so to make sure you don't piss him off, I'm not sure. So there was a lot more to be found on that place than I thought there would be. But I will leave it at that, because I know some of you are going off to do the quiz on the Steamboat page. So have fun, whatever you're up to. And tomorrow is random chat and catch-up night. And then after that, it's... what is it the day after tomorrow? What is it the day after tomorrow? I have to look it up every time. I can't remember it. I can't remember. Let's have a look. Got to bring it up on the phone. Monday is Rate Castle. So tomorrow is the random blethering catch-up, and Monday is Rate Castle. So we'll see what we can find on that one. But I will leave you to it. Have fun. And I'll see you tomorrow. Night.